Before history was written, before kingdoms had names, there were people who came from the edge of the world. Not from empires, not from great cities, but from cold lands where survival was never guaranteed. They crossed oceans no one dared to cross. They built ships that rewrote the map of the world. And wherever they arrived, they were remembered. Not as traders, not as farmers, but as something far more terrifying: Vikings. But this is not their story, not the one you've heard, because the truth is, they were never just raiders. They were not one people, not one kingdom, not even one identity. They were explorers, traders, craftsmen, families, and yes, sometimes warriors. This series is not about myths. It is built from history, from archaeology, from the words they left behind and the ones written about them. Across this journey, we will uncover everything: where they came from, what shaped them, how they lived, how they ruled, how they fought, and how they changed the world before slowly disappearing into it, not as legends, but something far more real. Who were the Vikings? Because the answer is not simple. They were not a tribe, they were not a nation, and they were never just what history made them seem. The word Viking itself did not mean what you think it means. A man could live his entire life as a farmer and then, for one season, become something else entirely. So if they were not born as Vikings, what made them become one? To understand the Viking, you must first understand the world that created him. This is where the story begins. They came without warning. From beyond the edge of the known world, where cold seas met darker skies, ships, long, narrow, silent, cut through the morning mist. By the time they were seen, it was already too late. To those who witnessed them, they were not men. They were a punishment, a terror sent by forces no one understood. But history tells a different story. The word Viking did not mean a people. It did not describe a tribe or a nation. It was something far more fluid. In the language they spoke, Old Norse, to go a Viking meant to set out on a journey, sometimes for trade, sometimes for exploration, and sometimes for war. This means something important. A Viking was not what you were, it was what you did. A man could spend most of his life as a farmer, working stubborn land beneath a brutal sky, raising animals, building a home, protecting a family. And then, for one season, he would leave. He would step onto a ship and become something else. Not because he was born violent, but because the world he lived in gave him few choices. To understand the Viking, you have to understand that world. Far to the north of Europe lies Scandinavia, a land of extremes. Towering mountains, frozen forests, endless coastlines. What we now call Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. But over 1,000 years ago, these were not unified nations. They were scattered communities, separated by geography and shaped by it. In Norway, the land was steep and unforgiving. Farms clung to narrow valleys. Food was never guaranteed. Life demanded resilience. And so, people learned to look outward, to the sea. In Denmark, the terrain was softer, flatter, closer to mainland Europe. Here, power began to gather. Chieftains became kings, and ambition took form. In Sweden, vast rivers opened pathways into the east, not for conquest, but for connection. Trade routes stretched far beyond the horizon. Silver flowed in, stories flowed out. This was not one Viking world, it was many. Different people, shaped by different lands, moving in different directions. And yet, they shared something deeper, a way of seeing the world. They believed that fate was fixed, that every life had a thread already woven. No one could escape it, not even the gods. Their gods were not perfect. They struggled, they fought, they would one day fall. And still, they faced their destiny. This belief changed everything, because if your end is already written, then fear loses its power. Death was not the worst outcome. To die without honor, that was the true failure. And so when these men left their homes, they did not see themselves as invaders. They saw themselves as participants in a world governed by fate. The rest of Europe did not understand this. In the year 793, a monastery on the island of Lindisfarne was attacked. Monks recorded what they saw in fear and confusion. Never before has such terror appeared. To them, it was the beginning of something unimaginable. But for the people of the North, it was simply one moment in a much larger story. What we now call the Viking Age spans roughly 700 to 1100 CE, nearly 3 centuries of movement, expansion, transformation. But here's the truth most stories ignore. Most Vikings never fought in a single battle. They lived quiet lives. They farmed, built, traded, raised families, told stories by firelight. The image we carry today of wild warriors and endless raids is only one piece of a far more complex world. Because the Vikings were not a single force. They were not united. They were not even consistent. They were human. And what they became was shaped by the land they came from. Because if you truly want to understand why they crossed oceans, why they risked everything, why they became what the world feared, you must look closer at the land that made them.